if what you're feeling has a good energy to it, even if it feels a little bit weird or uncomfortable because you haven't felt that before. But if you sit with it and you can feel that the energy of it feels positive and loving, let's remember that likely it's people who love you, who are on the other side, who are coming to visit you and spend time with you, your spiritual team, souls that volunteered to hang out with you for this entire incarnation. I mean, that is love and commitment. So there's a very good chance that what you're feeling is from one of them. And that's beautiful. I mean, that's priceless. If it feels icky, it's probably icky. And you have to trust what your own sense of things really is. And that's like the only sort of meter that you actually have. There's a saying, you have to let go of the shore to be able to explore the ocean. If you hang on to, and I can think of a family member of mine who hung on to, well, this is the job I had. This is the job that made me feel good about myself. And that's what I do, even though circumstances didn't line up after a while. And I feel like when you want to live in the flow, you have to be willing to let go of that sense of identity of what you did or what you once did or what you once strove to do, to now look for, well, I want to keep moving and growing.
Hello, friends. It's Donna Bell, your host of To Hum is Human, the podcast where we explore the transformative power of tuning into our intuition to express our passionate purpose. Today's episode is called Listening Beyond: Trust, Intuition, and the Call to Serve. It's all about what becomes possible when we begin to listen, not just with our ears, but with our whole being. We'll dive into what it means to trust our inner knowing, especially when it calls us toward healing, service, and radical authenticity. Whether you're an emerging intuitive, a practicing healer, or simply someone learning to trust yourself more fully, this conversation is an invitation to move past surface noise and into the deeper call of your soul. I'm so honored to welcome today's guest, Noelle Deane. Noelle is a licensed marriage and family therapist, now intuitive medium, teacher, podcaster, and author of Mediumship Foundations, a condensed guide for the absolute beginner. Her work beautifully bridges the clinical and the spiritual, offering mediumship, medical intuition, channeled coaching, and mentorship for those called to intuitive service. You may also know her for her podcasts, Mediumship Sparks and Vagina Whispering, or through her unwavering commitment to helping others connect with spirit ethically, responsibly, and in full empowerment. Welcome, Noelle.
Thank you so much, Donna Bell. I'm really honored to be here.
Noelle, your path weaves together deep service, personal healing, and intuitive awakening. Could you take us back to the beginning? What originally drew you to the field of mental health?
I remember over 30 years ago, I had a job at a broker dealer in Manhattan, my first job after graduating from college. And I remember asking my boss, probably not the best choice, but like, what do you think I'd be good at? You think I'd be good at teaching? I love the idea of not teaching, but having those side conversations with kids who were having a rough day. And I never felt passionately about anything I could teach to actually feel drawn to pursue teaching. But later I realized, wait a minute, those side conversations, that's more my thing. So I went through some rough times in my own life. And when I moved to San Diego at some point, a few years after I'd been here, and I didn't have a clear sense of purpose, but I always wanted to help people. And I just realized I have to go to grad school to do something that I want, even if I wasn't sure what that was. And I wanted to save other people time, so maybe they wouldn't make some of the same mistakes that I did.
Wow, that's such a generous purpose, really. Now, you've spent many years in leadership within that space until your own health journey created a major turning point. Can you share a bit about how your own cancer treatment in 2015 reshaped your professional path and your relationship to intuition?
That's a beautiful question. Thank you. Yeah, I did direct service in a group home for 10 years, and then I was in management for about 4. And to be honest, I never really loved it. I mean, I had to wrap my brain around it. There were perks to not doing the direct service that I once did, And then I got a cancer diagnosis on Cinco de Mayo of 2015. And it was pretty shocking, as I'm sure it is for everybody who gets that. Didn't have breast cancer in my family. It was clear the path to take to stay alive. Like a lot of people who have chemotherapy, there can be repercussions. So I ended up, I don't even remember when it set in. I was kind of emailing myself occasionally so I could kind of mark the journey. I was even
Mm,
in a documentary actually, so it helped. It was a strange convergence of things, but yeah, local university and the cancer treatment center that I was getting my work done at had been working on a project. So I kind of had that part documented, but I wanted to be able to look back. And at some point, brain fog set in. You know, as women, we think of all the details of every decision. But when I say crickets, when people say, crickets, and so I'd been working towards following my intuition, checking in, as I call it.
mm,
And the person who really taught me that in a group that I was in called it that. And I had no choice but to rely on that to make every decision or ask my husband because there was nothing going on in my head. I was really scared I wouldn't have another sense of purpose, actually. You never know. And your doctor can't tell you, oh, you'll heal. My doctor would tell me, oh, in a year from now. And then I went back. I'm like, excuse me, it's been a year. He's like, well,
mm,
maybe two. There's
mm,
just how that medical intervention leaves everybody is a little bit different.
mm,
I'm still a terrible speller. I was
mm,
a great speller. Isn't that a
mm.
weird?
Yeah, it's interesting when something that dramatic and traumatic provides a moment for pause and sort
Yeah.
of reflection about what's going on in your life and how you address what is most important. And I imagine that a lot of shifting happened during that time about what you wanted to do and where you wanted to go. In 2017, you began exploring medical intuition and then moved more deeply into mediumship around 2021. What opened for you in those trainings and what kept you coming back?
When I was renewing my marriage and family therapy license, I had to get continuing education units. And I happened to go to something that drew my attention, which was an intro to medical intuition. Now, remember, I'm somebody who needs a strong sense of purpose. I didn't have one. And then I go to this intro and I can actually follow what she is having, the exercise she had everybody do. And I couldn't believe I could do that because in my head, I couldn't learn anything anymore.
Hmm.
And I chatted with the woman who was instructing this, who was a teacher, had her own business and medical intuition. I don't want to say a school, but she would teach. And anyway, and then I ended up meeting up with her again somewhere. And I was like, okay, this is too much of a coincidence. So I got involved with the training and it was very rigorous and it was surprising to me. I was like, wait, this is supposed to be intuition. How is there like a process to this? What's going on here? I learned some really intense lessons in doing that. She would say, okay, we're going to learn how to read Akashic records. Okay, so you're going to jump to the corner of your room and then you're going to climb the stairs. And I was like, what the hell's but I learned, and this lesson I try to instill in everybody that I interact with mediumship or intuition. You think you can't, but you have to try it because you
Mm,
likely can. You
mm.
just have no idea until you do it. And I always thought, oh my gosh, what is she doing to us? And then I would do it and I'd be like, oh my goodness, that was amazing.
Well, can you explain to our listeners what medical intuition is? I know very little about it, but I do know some things. So if you could clarify.
Sure. So, in the school that I went to, which was called the Practical Path, you would be trained to use your intuition and mainly clairvoyance, because that is the most neutral, was her opinion. And you would scan somebody's body and you could pick up on the areas where something was off balance. And
Mm,
then you could tune into that area and you could pick up on life lessons, belief systems, not necessarily past life info, but early life flashbacks of where, let's say, the imbalance began.
mm,
And it wasn't really part of her training, but I did an additional medical intuition training later, which brought in what would be considered more shamanic and indigenous practices. And I
mm,
really resonated with that because I did learn you could talk to livers and kidneys and hearts. They all had something to say, they had something to share.
mm,
And I didn't realize at the time that I was actually being trained in mediumship. I just focused on medical intuition.
mm,
And you were asking what happened in 2021. And at the end of 2020, a very close friend of mine, her stepdaughter, was in a fatal car accident. And I'm sure everybody that knew her and her family at the time, nobody knows what to do to support anybody. Anyway, about 2 weeks later, she came to my house like, "Hey, I'm picking up some lunch at Rubio's. Can I sit on the patio and talk with you?" And we sat there. And then I just kept getting this growing feeling. It's not like I hadn't ever delivered messages before. I'd gone to a spiritualist church development circle years earlier, but this was like really. And finally, I was like, okay, I can't hang on to this anymore. I think she's right here. And that started a 2-hour conversation.
Mm,
And there were tears and there was laughter and there were apologies. And I knew the background of what was a really challenging relationship for both of them and the profound genuineness and insight that came through from Amy, who was on the other side, was amazing. And I didn't know I could do mediumship like that. And that
mm.
was a huge turning point in my life and set me on a very different path.
Well, and I imagine that not necessarily expecting that to happen during that time allowed you to be more open to what you were receiving. Because sometimes I feel like when we think we can't do anything, just like you said before, when you think you can't do anything, you kind of set yourself up for challenges. Whereas you're like, actually, you can do many things if you stay open. And that was a beautiful testament to you just being open and saying, well, I can't hold this in anymore. Now it's, I need to tell you this. I imagine your friend's response too, because of course this was genuine. This was coming from a friend she trusted. This was heartfelt, like you knew a lot about her and her daughter. And I can just imagine the transformation that happened and the inspiration for you to say, wait a minute, I think this is what I'm supposed to be doing because you felt it and she felt it. And it was just something you can't really put a finger on. It's just bigger than what people can imagine, if you say.
Well, that set me on a path to start offering those kinds of readings. I'd done however many medical intuition practice readings to build confidence, and now
Mm,
I was off on this other path. So I started offering free readings on a Facebook page, or I kind of put out there into the ethers, hey, if you're connected with somebody that I know,
mhm,
please come through. And that helped me interact with like friends' parents from high school and that kind of thing. It also showed me because I connected with a few people who, like my neighbor's daughter, another old friend, and this friend Rose that I'm talking about. And that inspired me to teach because
mm,
the suffering that I saw, and I know the mediumship really did help, but they were still having to grieve this such intense loss. And that actually inspired me to teach. I wasn't thinking of teaching at all. Now that I'm saying it, I'm like, oh, right. I knew I wanted to teach something someday, but I really wanted to lower the suffering of these people that I knew
right,
and loved. And that
right.
was the only reason I started teaching. And I thought, hey, if I'd made tomato sauce for the last 20 years, I could
Mhm.
teach how to make tomato sauce. So let me start teaching mediumship. So that started me on an additional path.
You're passionate about helping people connect with spirit for themselves without becoming dependent on a practitioner. Why is that so important to you?
Well, about 30 years ago, I was walking down the street minding my own business and was approached by a young woman who offered her mother in law to read my horoscope chart and astrological chart and give me some insight about myself. And one thing led to another. And I ended up at some point completely trusting a very, very psychic woman who
Mm,
had very bad intentions and
mm,
basically scammed people for money. And about a year or so later, I had to declare bankruptcy. I had been in some very bad situations.
mm,
And that's also part of why I moved to San Diego is to get, I used to say, to get away from the choices that I made in New Jersey. But I had some serious PTSD.
mm,
And so moving can really help because you don't have the same kinds of triggers. And
right.
it's ironic that I end up in this line of work, but I know there are karmic reasons why I had that experience. So I
Mm,
can't be mad. I can't victimize myself. I
mhm,
think I did some version of that in a previous life or more than one life.
mhm.
So hopefully I'm even now. And you're right. I don't want anybody to be in that position. It was my own insecurity that put me in that position. And I'm unwilling to support anybody in the insecurity part. In the empowering part, I'll do anything I can.
How did this experience shape your standards around integrity, empowerment, and the provider client relationship in spiritual work?
Well, there's a lot of training when you become a therapist to have
Mm,
very high ethical standards.
Mm.
Like, you can't have dual relationships. I mean, everything has to be in service of your client. Even your approach when you interact with them has to really be tracking what they want, not necessarily the style that you feel comfortable with, or you don't take them on as a client.
Mhm.
And you have to respect the power differential because I have way more information as a therapist than the client has about me. And you have to respect that. Now, it's different with mediumship, but it's not because I have privy to a lot more information about other people. If I was somebody who wanted to manipulate, just like everybody else who has strong intuition or survival skills that make them that way, we can really take advantage of people. And so being as clean as possible is really important.
People are coming to you in such states of grief and uncertainty and vulnerability, and it's a really privileged place to be. And if you treat it as such, that it is an honor and it is something where they are bringing probably their most truest self to you, is something that you keep sacred. And it is not something to be taken advantage of. And I'm so sorry you had that experience with that particular person, but now looking back, it sounds like it really made you more vigilant about having an integrity in doing your work. And I feel like that's probably the lesson within that experience.
If I can add something, when I provided direct service as a therapist, I worked with foster youth,
Mm,
teenagers actually. They're not in foster care because of their own actions. They're in there because of things that were done to them. And so I ended up falling in love with working with a very vulnerable population of people who had experienced a lot of trauma, a lot of neglect, had a lot of mistrust and distrust of adults,
mm,
people in the system. And I was able to earn their trust. I don't know that I was a good therapist at all, but I was really good at loving them.
mm,
And so I just kind of stuck with that.
mhm,
And to earn their trust was one of the biggest honors of my life and still something I'm excessively proud of having worked there for 10 years. And
mm.
so that's, I feel like, was part of my training in doing this now.
Absolutely. I mean, trust really is something earned. It's
Oh,
not something you freely give away. And to be able to work with such a vulnerable population that's already been through so many experiences where they probably feel like there is no one to trust. That is such an important role for you to have. And what a gift, too, for having them as being your teachers as
mm.
well, for sure. Now, in your teaching of mediumship, which I love because you're saying, I don't think I'll be a teacher. I'll do something else way in the beginning. And now look at you, you're teaching. You often remind students not to throw away the first pancake when receiving messages and that the wackier, the better. What do those teaching moments mean and how do they help normalize the learning curve of mediumship?
I do tend to use various food references. So when you make pancakes, the first one's always a little funky. And if you have a dog, let's say the dog always gets the first pancake. But the first pancake is that first hit that you get in that just millisecond. And that is the truest information you could get. So I encourage people, don't throw that away. I've also brought up be the marshmallow. Let
Mm,
it impress you and not make an impression upon you of what the message is, and then you let it go. And the wackier, the better. Also, finding things that are surprising and unexpected. I just try to have these little taglines about things to really try to remind people that this is so much easier than you think it's going to be. And we always think we have to toil at things. I have to work on it to get really good. But doing mediumship is like you have to unpeel that to be able to
okay.
get good messages. I'm actually teaching my first in person class currently, and I am loving it. I
Congratulations.
wasn't sure, but I felt drawn to do it that way. And I'm so glad that I am. I'm even starting my first mediumship development circle this Sunday, which is super exciting.
Wow. It feels like you've definitely tapped into what you're supposed to be doing and things are just expanding and growing. When it's easy, that means you're doing the right thing. I always find when I'm putting something together and it's such a struggle, it's just like they're telling me that's not what you're supposed to be doing. And if most of the time we could hear that, that would have saved a lot of time and suffering. That is life. That is the lesson. In your view, what makes intuitive or mediumistic skills transferable across different areas of life, not just in session work, but in everyday relationships or leadership?
Well, in different programs that I've been in, I've learned different ways or things to check in about. And I remember years ago, my husband and I, and he's also very intuitive. And that's one of the foundations of our relationship is being very connected to the universe, really trying to listen. And we would just check in about what is for the highest good of all. And I had to really open my mind to, even if it's giving somebody a large amount of money I don't really want to give, or it means doing something that I really don't feel like doing, but I know it's the right thing. I genuinely want to live in that sense of what is for the highest good of all. I feel a little torn sometimes because I know with my indecisiveness, it can seem like I'm handing over my power all the time. Well, tell me
Mm,
what to do. Tell me what to do. But now I feel like I've evolved and it's become more of I'm just feeling into what is the next right thing. Even the clothes I'm wearing, the jewelry I'm wearing, everything like that is, well, I'm asking what is going to support me the most right now. And
mhm.
like I saw this shirt when I was about to get in the shower. I'm like, okay, thank you. And
That I mean, it could be as easy as that, right? If you're just like they just put it
right,
in your path, and you're like, "Oh, thanks. Yeah, thanks." Or, "Where did I put that thing?" And then your head turns to the thing, you're like, "Thanks." People think it's an intense thing to kind of go through and
mhm,
follow your inner wisdom. You're like, "Oh, I don't know. It's a little
mhm,
scary, and I don't know what to do if I'm supposed to be doing something and I have no idea how to do it." And I think that's a point in your life where you're just like, "Oh, you're being presented a challenge to help you grow in a different way. And you could choose to take the challenge or you could choose to not take the challenge. But usually taking the challenge just gets you to a different place. And I love that how your journey was kind of like, huh, well, I was presented with this challenge and then I was led to this. And then within this, then I found this. And now look at you. You're now teaching classes on intuitive development and mediumship. And I just think what a beautiful path that you have taken. Now, you're deeply aware of the power differential between provider and client. How do you keep your work empowering and clean while still honoring the sacredness of what comes through?
I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but I think it is. So I try to be the best transmitter possible and to really just as specifically as I get information, I want to deliver it. Part of my training as a therapist, but also my love of other people makes
Hmm.
me feel a little protective. So there's always a little bit of a filter up that if anything feels kind of off, I question whether I should deliver it or not. And it doesn't happen very often that that even comes up as an issue. And sometimes it's very unexpected. One example is a reading years ago. I kept seeing a handgun, a visual of a handgun as I'm doing a reading for a woman. And her loved one in spirit is giving me that visual. And I was like, what do I do inside? And I
Right.
probably 4 times with her higher self. I asked my guides, like, "What do I do with this information?" And I kept getting, "Deliver it, deliver it." And so I was like, "Okay, I just wanna prepare you. This is a little graphic and I'm finding it a little bit scary, but this is what I'm seeing." She's like, "Oh, yeah, no, that's my dad." And I forget why exactly. I think he might have been he at least had a handgun, but
Mm,
to her, that was validation. It was a scare I mean, you see something that looks dicey when you were talking about, that feeling of anxiety that we can have versus intuition, and there really is
mm,
kind of a drastic difference if you really tune into yourself about that feeling. I don't
mm.
usually get anxious when I'm being in that intuitive space, but something that kind of throws you off, you have to just kind of double check and triple check maybe until you really feel clear, "Okay, this is the right thing to do, and I'm gonna do that."
Well, and that's just another sign of integrity in your work. And I'm sure through your work as a therapist and now as a mentor, teacher, medium, there's do no harm
Oh,
when you
thank
are
you. Yeah.
working. Just do no harm. And when you live by that and work by that, then you know you're working with someone who comes into this work with a certain sacredness and honor and perspective of bringing the client to a place that is more healing than hurting, right? And that's what I hope most people who do this work or all people who do this work consider. And maybe there aren't as many that are on the shady side. I'm hoping that's fewer and fewer. But to understand that, trust your judgment when you come and work with somebody and see their record and see how people work with them. And usually word of mouth is like the best because people love to work with people who are honest and caring. Like who doesn't, right?
Yeah, and I've had to learn to be less hypervigilant about protecting people from paying me to
Right.
meet with them. And one
Right.
of the reasons that I like to when I do a session is I am clear with people, please have extra time
Mm,
because I don't want to stop at, let's say, 50 minutes and say, okay, well, we're going to need to pick this up again another time. I mean, I try not to stay past like an hour and 15 minutes because then I'm just kind of drained. I want to go until we all feel complete. The person on the other side, the person in front of me over Zoom, and myself. Yes, it feels complete now. And that feels like kind of an ethical choice.
mm,
And thank you for bringing up the do no harm. That's certainly anybody in the medical field. And I hope anybody who does anything with energy
mhm,
is that we're coming from that place. And even checking in, offering a free consultation, I think is a beautiful way to offer to people. We should feel each other out. Make sure I
mm,
can actually do what you want because sometimes I don't like being blindsided. I've been blindsided a few times by
mm,
people who have very intense things they want from the person on the other side that really isn't how it works.
mm,
And I'm learning to be more and more straightforward and honest, even if it's bad news for people.
mm,
An eternal people pleaser, or I used to be.
mm,
So that's quite a chore to have to
mm,
be super honest about that stuff. But that's part of it too. Yeah, I want people to feel like they don't need a medium.
mm,
They don't need my book. They don't need my videos. There's so many resources that are free. I mean, it just takes time. I took the slow road and then I started taking classes eventually. And not because I felt like I needed them or I had to fix myself, which is why I did a lot of personal growth my
mm,
first 10 years in San Diego. This
mhm,
is because I enjoy it and it feels very different. And when I notice that familiar trying to fix myself, oh, I'm not quite good enough kind of feeling, which has
mhm,
only come up once in the last probably like decade, then I
mm,
sit with, well, I don't know if I should take this course because it's provoking that feeling. And
mm.
I never want to operate from that feeling anymore of I'm not enough and insecure.
So, what would you advise for listeners who are just beginning to trust their intuition or maybe they feel afraid to trust it? What's one thing you'd want them to know? Or several. You don't have to keep it down to one because there's so many different things you'd like them to know.
There's so many. Well, first, let's keep in mind that if what you're feeling has a good energy to it, even if it feels a little bit weird or uncomfortable because you haven't felt that before, but if you
Mhm,
sit with it and you can feel that the energy of it feels positive and loving, let's remember that likely it's people who love you, who are on the other side, who are coming to visit you and spend time with you, your spiritual team, souls that volunteered to hang out with you for this entire incarnation. I mean, that
mm,
is love and commitment. So
mhm,
there's a very good chance that what you're feeling is from one of them. And that's beautiful. I mean, that's priceless. If it feels icky, it's probably icky. And you have to trust what your own sense of things really is. And that's like the only meter that you actually have. But you have to
mm,
get quiet enough to hear the real answer. There are times I experience a lot of physical sensations now. I didn't
mhm,
used to, but
mm.
I do. And thank goodness I didn't before because that would scare the Jesus out of me.
Too overwhelming sometimes
Yeah.
for people.
Yeah. But some people are thrown into the deep end with their spiritual awakening. It sounds terrifying. And I've met a few people that have had it that way. I did a series on my own podcast called Are You Crazy or Connected? I did that because a lot of times we experience things and we wonder, have I really lost it now? Because now I'm
Mhm,
seeing this. But that's how information comes through is
mm,
it's surprising and unexpected. And if it feels in your body like, no, I'm just feeling nervous because this is new and it's a little uncomfortable,
mhm.
but I think I can trust it, then you have to learn to trust yourself.
And that takes time. That's not something
Right.
that's necessarily going to happen overnight. But I do wonder if people come up to you and say they're considering either having a reading or consider learning about mediumship, but they have this incredible fear. What do you speak about when they ask you about this particular topic?
Well, I have asked people what they are fearful about. Some people are afraid because their religious upbringing tells them that doing this is wrong or in some way goes against spiritual beings that they love and respect. And so we talk about that. Some people are afraid that once they open the door, sorry, I just got a visual of somebody putting their big boot in and then you're trying to close the door, but you can't close the door.
Mhm.
They're afraid that they'll just be bombarded all the time. So I think sitting with what is really the fear or the concern, and then to just talk about it from my experience, which I'm
Mhm.
always happy to share from. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm very open, but I'm not bombarded. I'm
Mhm.
never bombarded, but I also have boundaries. And I think I have these implicit boundaries within
Mhm.
me. And
Mhm.
I thank my therapist training for that I learned to do that. So I don't get jumped on.
Mhm.
Well, if you listen to Crazy or Connected, but typically that
Mhm.
doesn't happen. But yeah, learning to trust yourself, and you can only do that over time with experience. And
Mhm.
then if you practice on other people and you get validation, okay, well, I got this visual and it was wacky. I was brave enough to share it. I felt naked, but I stood on the edge of the cliff and I shared exactly what I saw. And the person said, "Oh, yeah, that's my ex husband," or
Mm.
"That's my dad."
Mhm.
It's not supposed to make sense to you if you're getting information for another person. It's supposed to
Mhm.
make sense to them. So you
Right.
you can't interpret, you can't try to put it through your own filter, because then you're going to kind of mess up the message for them. Now they're going to go to the left instead of the right where they would have gone naturally, and you don't want to do that.
Right. Listening to you, how often does the therapeutic lens come in your teaching and in your mediumship?
I realized when I was working on a yard project and my neighbor would stop by once in a while and we would talk. And then one time she walked away and said, "Thanks for the free therapy." I was like, no, I don't know how to talk to people like a normal person. When did
Well,
I
what does
lose
that
that?
even
Well, I get in a mode now. My husband will say, "Oh, I can hear when you're in podcasting mode." Like I kind of shift. I didn't realize he even noticed that. I don't think I can separate myself from that, but I can feel it come up. And I actually love when it comes up. Like in a mediumship session, there are a couple of times when I've done what I would consider mediation between
Mm,
the person I'm on Zoom with and their person in spirit. And I can feel from the person in spirit because I've been around mental health issues. And I'm
mm,
like, hold on. And there was one in particular that I'm thinking of where the mom was really not very well. And she was still kind of in that state, even though she'd
mm,
been crossed over for a while. And it was so nice to just feel this self absorbed comment she was about to make. And I was like, hold on, let's talk about this from, I don't know that you're hearing your daughter. And
mm,
I
mm,
mean, I know it might sound weird. People have different ideas about when people cross over, what state they're in, what state of mind they're in.
mm.
And I feel like, and I wanted to acknowledge you, Donnabelle, because you're part of a book where a
Oh,
lot of people who offer healings, I'm getting confirmation chills on this, added these different excerpts. And I focused on yours and the questions that you asked. And I'm feeling emotional just talking about it. And one of the
oh.
beautiful things that came out of doing the exercise that you offer was for
Mhm,
me to be able to acknowledge that I am somebody through which apologies and genuine, authentic, loving communication can come through. And I
mm,
have brought through some amazing messages. I've cried my eyes out sometimes, somebody else's tears, because I could feel the intensity of their love or their apology or their
mm,
compassion for their loved one who's still here.
mm.
And those have been some of the most beautiful moments in mediumship. And I appreciate that now I feel like, oh, that's right. That is me. And that is part of the benefit, I think, of my therapist training.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. I thank you for reading The Intuitive Entrepreneur. There's a book out there that I wrote a chapter about called The What If Principle. And it's really about knowing who you are and how you bring that part of yourself into what you do. And it is essentially the whole premise behind this podcast is what am I supposed to do with what I'm given and
Mm.
where do I find the joy? Where do I find the joy and the meaning in this life? And so
Mm.
thank you, Noelle, for sharing that. There are so many aspects of doing this work, but now we could talk a little bit about your podcast and your book. You have two podcasts and books. So how did those come about? Like, did you even have the inkling or knowing that you would even do that sort of thing?
My husband and I were just talking about this yesterday. How did it even start? Actually, sometime last year, I got what was a seemingly random phone call. "Hi, we're interviewing Reiki practitioners for this 5-minute slot just to introduce your business." And I was like, well, I don't really do Reiki, but could it be mediumship? And it was kind of a marketing thing from a company. And then I got a phone call. "You did great. How was that for you?" kind of thing. And they offered a significant package to pay for a podcast with a professional radio host.
Uh,
And it's not something I would have seen myself doing, but I couldn't tell you all of the synchronicities that lined up with
mm,
that happening, that phone call, that second phone call, receiving an inheritance that had been looming for 6 years.
wow.
And it just all, I mean, on the same day, on the same day, these things came together. It was amazing. And there's no denying or doubting. So I
Mm,
just went for it. And
mhm.
I even bought an additional package because I was like, I feel like I'm learning so much. And I enjoyed every meeting. I was nervous as hell the first time. I
Of
mean, I was
course.
kind of a wreck. And then at some point I had a washcloth I had to hang on to because my palms would sweat so much 'cause I was so nervous.
Behind the scenes, nobody sees
Oh,
this.
thank goodness. But I learned a lot, and then I got an email from a different place saying, "Hey, based on analytics, because you're a
Mm,
therapist, because you're this, because you all these things that are just these things you could say, yeah, well, it's just me. I wasn't
yeah.
trying to do
Mhm,
those things." And
mhm.
anyway, I just did an additional package with them for another 104 episodes through Bold Brave TV to do Mediumship Sparks.
Wow.
And vagina whispering was I have a friend, Jennifer, and we were just meeting to support each other to write our books. And I don't even know why we started talking about I mean, we're two women. She's perimenopausal, I'm menopausal, and we were just
Mhm,
talking about changes. And no, we don't hear enough about people talking about this. And so we decided to start vagina whispering, which is really just something fun that we like to do occasionally. And we don't
mm,
take it very seriously. Like
mhm,
we're not consistent about episodes, but we just do it as it works for us. And we've
mhm.
gotten some really cool guests, which I really love. But with Mediumship Sparks, it's interesting I really genuinely want to spark people. Try
Yeah.
on these different ways that I'm using mediumship. What can you do? What can you do with it?
I think that's brilliant. And yet another way in which you're showing others how they can tap into their own awareness and their intuition. And I love that because it's so empowering when people have that spark and realize, like, oh, okay, yes, I can do this. Listening to you and all the synchronicities happening regarding the podcast, it's like, folks, that's what it's like when you say yes to whatever you're supposed to be doing even though it's a little scary and out of your comfort zone, like you just did it. And now look, it's something that's like growing and expanding and then leading to so many other different connections. Like that's really what it's all about. And I love that. So,
Yeah, there's a saying, and I'm not going to remember it, so I'm going to butcher it, but you have to like let go of the shore to be able to explore the ocean. I know
mm,
that's not really it, but if you hang on to, and I can think of a family member of mine who hung on to, well, this is the job I had.
mm,
This is the job that made me feel good about myself, and that's what I do. Even
mm-hmm,
though circumstances didn't line up after a while. And I feel like when you want to live in the flow, you have
mm-hmm,
to be willing to let go of that sense of identity of what you did or what you once did or what you once strove to do to
mm-hmm,
now look for, well, I want to keep moving and growing. And there's a bit of a restlessness to it. And certainly it makes you uncomfortable because I would never have thought about podcasting. And now I kind of can't stop.
podcasting was not in my cards ever. So this is also I'm growing and learning as I'm doing this as well. So just so
Yeah.
you know. Noelle, how can listeners connect with you or work with you or explore your offerings?
Thank you. So my website and everything that is accessible to me is Connecting with Noelle. And it really was meant to be connecting
Mm,
with Noelle, not
mhm,
through Noelle and not with Noelle. So, but my website is called connectingwithnoelle.com. I have a Gmail address with the same, and it's Noelle. I also have a YouTube channel that offers a lot of free videos, and I would love it if your listeners took advantage of that. I have how to use your body as a pendulum, which is one
mm,
of my secret weapons. It's not a secret, but I use it all the time to double check what I'm getting so I have extra confidence.
mhm.
And yeah, please reach out. Actually, I would love to do like talk about the wackier the better. I'm hoping that people will reach out and say, this might sound crazy, but I'm hoping somebody will connect with X about this for me. I'd be like, let me try. I shouldn't, I'm not going to say I wouldn't say no, but it has to be ethical and sound reasonable to a degree.
Mm.
But I love the wackier the better. Yeah, please reach out. I would love that.
Well, that's definitely an invitation. So I hope whoever's listening to this will definitely check those out. Noelle Deane, thank you so much for sharing your story, your integrity, and your beautifully grounded approach to intuitive work. Your journey from clinical service to spiritual guidance is just a powerful reminder that healing doesn't always follow a straight line, but
Um,
it leads us deeper into truth. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bell, for having me. Thank you to your listeners for listening. And if there's anything I can do to support you, please do reach out. It would be my honor.
Oh my gosh. Absolutely. And of course, to our listeners, thank you for being here, for tuning in with open hearts and curious minds. Just feel a little, hopefully, you'll feel a little more connected to your own inner wisdom and a little more courageous in
Mm.
following where it leads. Thanks for being here. I hope something from today's conversation stayed with you or gave you a new way to look at things. That awareness, that pause, that's where things start to shift. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who might need it. You can learn more about my work and what's coming up at sonorouslight.com, and you can follow me on Instagram at To Hum Is Human. Until next time, keep humming.